like Diarmida, we wanted to give traditional artists an opportunity to introduce us to another artist or a source of inspiration that has left a lasting impression on them. So over the next 4 weeks, I hope you encounter some new figures or maybe learn a bit more about a traditional artist you might be vaguely familiar with. Now this week, it's all about family, as our 5 artists have decided to focus on a relative. Some of them were lucky enough to spend a lot of time with their chosen visionary, while others never actually got to spend that time with them. But as the great poet Michael Hartnett said in his poem Death of an Irishwoman, written for his grandmother, he said, "I loved her from the day she died." And that can happen too, as we see this week. Our relationship with a relative can continue to grow and to develop even long after their passing. Mar sin gan hen muile, ra mit chofada le glantan glas dors agus chig alientor, commodores agus Mhaonaigh go clue internationalta urti. To kick off 2020 Visionaries, here's Mairéad ní Mhaonaigh.
Fáilte romh a chairde. My name is Mairéad ní Mhaonaigh, and I'm going to talk to you about my father, my greatest inspiration. This is a lovely image that the Belfast artist Barry Kerr gave me recently of my father and I playing a duet fiddle. And I know that this actual image came from a TV show we did together when I first went to college in Dublin, and he came up, and I think the great Pádraig Ó Ciara was the interviewer, and we played a few tunes, so it's lovely to have, and I just got this recently. But Francie was my father, a great father he was, full of the joys of the world and full of development and fun. A very creative man, loved writing, loved music, loved creating. He was a drawer, he was a good drawer, but he would never claim that. But I loved sitting down with him, drawing pictures, and he had a great facility to bring you to a place where it was like a vacuum, where creativity could, there was no time limit. And I think that was a great plus he had as a teacher as well. He had time for children. He understood children. He was a child, you know, he never lost that childlike spirit. And while we'd be sitting in the classroom, excuse me, while we'd be sitting in the classroom, he'd talk to us about all the mountains and the islands around us. Of course, one of the islands was Gola, and one of the songs around here, the children's songs from around here, is called Bwaidí Nellimi Jimmy Go Gola, which is Bwaidí Nellimi Jimmy Go Gola. You know, so there was Gola. So the song, it came from where we were from. So that was very important. And he also, when I got interested in more serious songs, it was always from someone from this locality. That's where she lived, or that's where he lived, or from my uncle Jimmy Denny, whom he was married to an aunt of mine, Auntie Nan, who was my mother's sister, and lots of songs came from him. And he was Francie's best pal at school and neighbours, so both of them married 2 sisters. So also, Francie's music came from his mother, Shúilleabháin Róisíomóide. And Róisíomóide, she played the button accordion and the concertina. And I'm just going to play you one of the tunes that came from her, first of all, which goes back to the Príomh Mór, which is Tarla Mac Sibhne. And Tarla Mac Sibhne was the last of the bardic players. Like, he came through, he looked at himself as being of the gentle people, you know, from na Huisle. His people would have been from Doe Castle, the McSweeneys of Doe Castle. And his music, he played the pipes and he also played the fiddle. But this is a tune that came directly from him. So we're talking about mid-1800s. So it's a Highland called All the Way to Galway. tune came to my father from his mother, from Thurla MacSimne, and I've taught it to my daughter, so it's going back generations in our family. It's not a tune that's heard a lot here in Donegal, but the Highlands would have come in with that connection with Scotland, where the mercenary soldiers would have gone over to Scotland in the Middle Ages to help with the chieftains over there and the clans, and they would come over here. So the MacSweeney's, I suppose, were directly na gaol, or some of those people that came over from Scotland and, you know, intermingled. Another tune that came through my grandmother was, it's a version of, my father used to say that it was a version of Shoe the Donkey, which is very well known all over the country, but it's really a mazurka. And mazurkas came from Poland originally through the big houses in London and arrived here in Ireland, I'd say, through the armies. So maybe that was the best thing the British Army ever did here. So we'll just I'll play you this mazurka that came from my grandmother as well, Roshevig Roshamoya. So here it goes. So that was the mazurka, and a very beautiful dance when it's danced properly. My mother was a great dancer, and actually that's how my father met my mother. He used to go over the hills over to Ghlacáin, where he was brought up in Coshcledy, and he went over the hill. There was a shortcut over to her house, and her house was a ceilidh house, and her father was he was a tailor, but he also played the box, and there used to be ceilidh every night, she said, in either her house or her uncle's house. All their houses were together in Ghlacáin, and she said Francie used to come over and play for them with her father, and that's how she got to know him, and that's how they ended up getting married. So, and my Uncle Jimmy then getting married to my Aunt Nan. So there was two boys from Coshcledy going over the hill to Ghlacáin, to up to no good, I suppose. But my mother remembers my father, and she said one of the big things that Francie was known for around Gweedore was his football. He was a great footballer. He was a small man, stocky, but very, very strong, and always was into posture and making sure you weren't slumping if you were sitting down. He was always very careful with us when we'd be walking to walk properly, and even in school as a teacher he'd get everyone to make sure that they were walking properly and sitting up properly before they started work in the morning. I thought that was very visionary of him, because he he taught us the 3 R's, as they would say, arithmetic, writing and reading, but his emphasis always was on the person or on the child. And I remember he helped out a lot of young children in the class. One of them had a heart problem, and he noticed the discolour in the child and happened to tell the parents. Another child would have had hearing loss, and other teachers thought that maybe the child was misbehaving, but the child couldn't hear. So he helped. I remember specifically those two children were helped immensely by his great skill of focusing on the child and making sure the child was well in a whole way. Also, he'd sit in the classroom and we'd look out at Errigal and at Wakish and all the mountains around us and the islands, and he'd say, "Sin góla agus willis ag an refa góla," you know. So Buedin elemi jami go góla, as every child in Ireland sings that nursery rhyme. So, but we could actually see the island. So the songs, they were kind of growing out of the ground. And to me, that made a huge impression as a young child. And when I got interested in other songs then, he would show me the houses where these songs were sung by, the people they were sung by. When I later on went to the archives and seeked out these older recordings, I was able to visualize their houses, which was good. And also very much into making the song real, that it wasn't just from a manuscript. It was, the tradition was alive. And I think that's very important for children, especially for me. It brought it all made sense. So I was very lucky that he had that vision. For instance, when I first learned Mhaonaigh, which is the mermaid, and it's a song specifically about associated with this area, and it's about a mermaid, and the story goes that the fisherman falls in love with the mermaid and he brings her home, he hides her crown, and they have two children, Maya agus Padraig. But when the children find the crown one day, the mother has to go back to sea. So this used to affect me a lot, and my father used to say, well, it could have been a nice way for a father to maybe explain to their children that their mother passed away and that she's still there waiting or looking at them or looking over them. So I'll sing you Mhaonaigh. It's the very first serious song I learnt, and it came from the singing, this particular version came from the singing of Annie on Éamonn, but my father knew her very well and he in turn learnt it from her. Is castle garvatu nagar hrig tun gran ten snarte go frasa favel na do Should hagif meri hinni sine halernamo warinye village durt my away Fadru an hladi sfavel na tre Mairéad Mhaonaigh should hagif meri hinni sine halernamo Tamisha tarsa agus speak o le mo way if Mhaonaigh small Frederick Bryan when Dunda Svavel na tre should hagive Mairéad sine So should hagive Mairéad sine an now. So here comes Mairéad, that was her name, and she's off into the ocean, swimming in the ocean. Very sad song. But my father wasn't sad. I can tell you that everything was a joy, and he wrote a lot of plays. He wrote a lot of pantomimes, and the pantomimes were very important around here. He wrote them in Gaelic, but they weren't the usual stories. He used local stories, the mythological figure of Balor na Shúilleabháin, Balor of the evil eye. And Balor was the head of the Fomorian clan, who were the kind of the dark clan. And then Lu being the god of the Danan, Tuatha De Danann, he killed him. But this story of the dark against the good and the good always winning. So there was a lot of this in the Shanachas, in the folklore around here. And he used all of those stories in the gamararty, or in the pantomimes that he wrote, and we all were part of them. All the school-going age children were part of the fairy scene. Then you had the teenagers who were always part of a pop scene, which was always played. I suppose the likes of Clonard came out of it, and my own brother played guitar and stuff like that. So you had all of that happening, and then you had the storyline going through of this good against bad, and of course good always winning. And there was always the principal girl, and there was principal boy, and there was just fantastic and great fun in the middle of it as well. So our earlier childhood, the only time I was on stage was in dramas or in gamararty or singing in those kind of things. So then I suppose in the 60s people, and the late 60s, people started to take more notice of traditional music. My father up until then played in the house, and maybe at some céilís, random céilís here and there, but the music wasn't that popular as it is now in sessions outside. And that's, I suppose, in the mid-70s we started going to Shúilleabháin's bar to play sessions. And one of his favourite tunes was by a local man, Nearly Boyle. And I remember hearing the great Seamus Ennis, the collector, and the great, he was a fantastic piper as well. He said that Nearly Boyle was one of the most prolific fiddlers he had ever heard regarding his style and his capability. So Nearly Boyle was from over the road here from my own house in Cronashallag in outside Dunlow, and Francie used to listen a lot to Nearly Boyle growing up, because Nearly would play at the local dances. He would play jazz at the local dances, but was a great traditional musician as well. So I'll play you one of his compositions. It's called The Green Mountain. So that's the Green Mountain reel, a very favourite reel of my father's. But before I go, I have to mention the song that my father is mostly associated with, and it's Ghlacáin Loscador. And in the final verse, he says, "Tá éit mo chrí, the gafaris ga morí, ska paiste bug is mór, a tá bio go buan gan vuirt gan ruam fa Ghlacáin Loscador." So that's written on his grave. I hope you enjoyed my little time talking about my father.
To many, Johnny O'Leary was a legendary Shúilleabháin button accordionist whose name and fame spread both nationally and internationally. He was once described by the great Irish music collector Bryan Bernach as being the national custodian of Shúilleabháin music. To many others, Johnny O'Leary was a great character. He was a very witty man who always enjoyed telling a good yarn or story from the days gone by. But to me, Johnny O'Leary was granda. I have many cherished memories of being in my grandfather's company. I suppose my earliest memory would be a day that my mother dropped me down to his house in Rathmore. I was only maybe 4 years of age at the time, and my grandmother was away the same day, so it was just Johnny looking after me for a few hours. And I was at the age where I was very much obsessed with action figures, so I used to always have Superman, Batman, Action and whatever I could get my hands on, and once I'd have them toys I'd be happy out. But I remember distinctly I was playing away with my toys on the floor right beside where the stove was in the house, and in the midst of the whole thing anyway, Johnny got the notion to go cleaning out the stove. Well, anyway, my mother landed to collect me about maybe a couple hours later, and she was horrified when she saw the cut of me, because my face was covered in black soot. It was destroyed after Johnny cleaning out the stove. So I remember that well, and the same day actually, they went over to the kitchen table then, they drank a cup of tea, and my mother said to Johnny, "So how did you get on with him anyway? How was he?" And I remember Johnny saying, "Grand old girl, he's over there talking away to himself all day." And you know, he wasn't telling a lie either, because I was talking away to myself. Johnny played, of course, in the famous Dan Connell's bar in Mhaonaigh for close to 40 years, and I was with him there on a good few occasions. So I have some lovely memories of my time going to Mhaonaigh. I suppose different things come to mind. I remember on the Friday night, of course Johnny played there on Friday and Sunday nights. Friday night was mainly the listening session, and then Sunday nights he'd play for dancers, so they had a fine hall there. So on the Friday nights when the music session would be going on in the front of the bar, myself and my cousin would take off out the back to the dance hall, and we'd be scutting out there and sliding around the place, I suppose doing the best to injure ourselves really. And I also remember then when we'd land into the bar, you know, we'd always be there maybe an hour before he'd start playing. And you know, when Johnny had ordered his first pint, he'd leave myself and my cousin take an old sneaky sippy of it. So that's another memory I have. And I suppose, you know, as well as, you know, having great fun with him, he always was very compassionate with us as well, because I remember, you know, he might be in the middle of playing a tune in Dan Connell's in a big session, and we used to always want to go down to the chipper. There was a chipper just down from the bar, and he never failed to oblige any time we asked. He could be in the middle of playing a tune, he'd drop the box and take us down to the chipper. One of the last moments I shared with Johnny was a Sunday afternoon. at my Aunt Ellen's house in Killarney. And that same day I also witnessed a very touching moment between my two grandparents. I was sitting on the couch and my grandmother Lil was on one side of me and Johnny on the other, and I think Johnny knew he wasn't in the best of health, and knew that he was, you know, quite low, and you know, I think he said something along the lines of something like that to Lil, that I'm not feeling too good. But I remember my grandmother saying to him, you know, look Johnny, don't be afraid of it. Aren't all your friends up there? Isn't Dennis and Padraig waiting for you? Haven't Dennis been waiting for you so long? They're all above, and don't be afraid. And I always think about that moment.
You will now hear a live recording of a polka I composed in honour of my two grandparents, Johnny and Lil, and the fantastic life they shared together. It's called The Perfect Marriage. I am accompanied here by Michael O'Connor on guitar.
So, February the 9th, 2004 was the day that my grandfather sadly passed away. I remember being at school, my local national school in Doireann. It was a Monday, and I remember a neighbour dropping me home from school and going into my other grandmother's house, and she sat me down by the range and she told me that my grandfather had passed away. And I remember bursting into tears. I was totally overcome with emotion. It was definitely probably the strongest feeling of emotion I had ever felt in my life up to that point. I was just shell-shocked. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember watching it on RT News then that evening, and that was quite overwhelming. And then going back to the wake in Killarney to my Aunt Ellen's house. And I remember two of his great friends and comrades, Jimmy Doyle and Brendan Begley, playing music at his wake, and as they were playing I was crying. So yeah, Johnny's passing had a profound impact on me, and it changed my life for sure. My mother clearly remembers me coming up to her after Johnny's burial and saying, "Mom, I think I'm going to start playing the button accordion." And I'd say at the time she might have thought it was a bit of a throwaway comment or whatever, but I stayed true to my word, and the following week I went down with a button accordion to my local national school in Doireann, and we were lucky enough to have a music teacher coming to our school, Henry Cronin, and Henry was absolutely fantastic with me when I went down with the accordion and was so encouraging, and yeah, he was brilliant with me for my early days playing the accordion. So once I started playing music, I just became completely engrossed in Johnny's music and style, and just never stopped listening to his recordings, anything I could get my hands on. I think probably the earliest recording that I can remember really being taken by was his first solo CD, which was called Music for the Set, and I remember I had a Discman at the time, and I used to fall asleep listening to that CD, and it was amazing actually, because certain tunes in that evoked such emotion within me. You know, even though I never played, you know, music while he was alive, it was as if that some of the tunes actually made sense to me and were actually sounding familiar. And I remember distinctly there was a track of polkas, and they're now very much synonymous with him, but the two or more polkas, and I remember as soon as they came on in my headphones, tears filled my eyes. Like it was amazing. They just seemed to bring back memories of being with him. So the two or more polkas were definitely two of Johnny's favourites, and interestingly enough, they were, I think, the last two tunes he ever recorded with his long-term playing partner Dennis Murphy, the legendary Dennis Murphy. And I think there's plenty in those tunes even that, you know, you could talk about in relation to, you know, Johnny's imaginative and expressive playing style. Triplets were a massive thing with Johnny. He was really prone to throwing in triplets at, you know, in places where you didn't think it was really possible even. So like in the first one of those polkas, in the second part, more often than not you hear people play but he opted to throw in a triplet there, which really gives the tune an added dimension and a great hop and adds to the spirit of the tune. He was a deadly man for never playing the same thing over and over again. He loved coming up with variations and came up with some very nice ones too. And you would have heard in the second part of the two or more polka there that you know, I changed it on the last time around, and that was again a variation of Johnny's, where instead of playing all the time, he added this variation. Another example of, I suppose, a great variation that he came up with on the spot was in a fairly renowned Steve Lucas slide, commonly known as one of the Brusna slides. the second part of this slide. It's usually finished with, whereas Johnny, going back around into the first part, came up with this piece of magic. Another polka that comes to mind was his version of a polka that's probably a common tune, but he had a version that he learned from his uncle Dan Leary, who was a pupil of Tom Billy Murphy, and a lovely variation in it. So the polka goes something like. And the second part. Johnny added this variation, so plenty triplets. So yeah, he was deadly man for putting in triplets, and he also liked, you know, drawing heavily from fiddle players, and I know that he took a lot on board from Padraig O'Keefe and Dennis Murphy in particular, and you know, tried to imitate what they were doing in the fiddle on the box, and that's why, you know, Johnny also did a lot of double stopping. Yeah, there's some of the features of Johnny's playing that I've tried to take into my own music. I suppose I would have started playing on the B and C system, and I suppose, you know, after playing for a few years, I suppose, and after, you know, really fully beginning to appreciate the greatness of Johnny's music and style, I felt that it was only, you know, right that I try my hand at playing his system, which was of course the C#D system of accordion playing, and I've definitely found that I can get more a connection and a closeness to his music by playing the C#D. Ever since Johnny's passing, my whole life has revolved around trying to be a good exponent of Shúilleabháin and basically just trying to do my grandfather proud. You know, my grandfather's style was extremely unique, and you know, I've never set out to be a carbon copy of his music, because I actually don't think you could achieve that anyway. His playing style was so unique. But I would like to think that there are elements of his style and characteristics of his music alive and well in my own playing style, and I'd like to think that what I'm doing musically at the moment is, you know, a good representation of what was passed down from my grandfather. I've dreamt about Johnny a few times, but there was one dream in particular where I believe there was a nice message in it, because, you know, Johnny played at the Scoil Saora Willie Clancy every year from its foundation in 1973, and played in Paddy Hennessy's bar for years, and then moved to the Westbridge bar after Paddy Hennessy's closed. And in my dream, I was a young boy learning the accordion, and I happened to join Johnny's session, but I wasn't his grandson. I was just an ordinary youngster learning to play music, and Johnny was very good to me in the dream and asked me to play a tune and encouraged me. And what I took out of that was a message that he was kind of maybe telling me that, you know, that's the way to do things. Be nice to people, you know, encourage the youth, try and bring people on, and forget about being Johnny O'Leary's grandson or being such a one's this, that or the other. That's irrelevant. There's nothing more important than the music itself. And just be nice to people and bring people along and encourage them. And that was very much the message I got from that dream, and who knows, maybe it was the man himself that came to me. The journey, it's like life, you know, life is like a song, as they say, full of high notes and low notes, but always a beautiful song. So that's how I describe the music journey. There's always ups and downs, but you always have to enjoy the scenery along the way.
As we come to the conclusion of my video, I think it's only fitting that I pay a visit to Ghlacáin graveyard and play a tune for the man himself.
Siad clowní Shúilleabháin Maicí ó Chulé in year her vúscarí atá rantha gomsa don tunescan of seo. The Shúilleabháin Maicí family from Chulé in West Muskerry have had an enormous influence on my flute playing and on my slóir playing in particular. Today I will be focusing on the songs and the singing of Diarmaidín, Mhaonaigh, Danny and EIlís Maicí ó Shúilleabháin. Cailleach Diarmaidín go tobann sa bhliain 1991 benach dé leis. Agus is cuinlim go maith an chéad uair a chuaille mé tafid de Diarmaidín ag Canna. Bhíos ag freastal mar fáiste a rangana aráníochta le Mhaonaigh chéalachar san anad cultúrtha i Mhaonaigh, agus de bhí si ag iarraidh an áráin Mhaonaigh a bhuaine doing. Ba chuir si tafid de Diarmaidín ag Canna an áráin siúil doing, agus de bhí tionachar an bhuair aige orm. Is cuinlim an sprid agus an tanim agus an bhrí a chuir sé isteach san áráin. Agus bharrtaigh mé an lá sin dul a bheile agus an táráin álam mar ann maol an bhadóg mhuair. Sé donacha ó léire an talamh cáiliúil a chum an táráin agus tám chun é a haint díobh anis. sin ba é balahmhairne an chéad an maul a dabhlann méid de chuidí Shúilleabháin Maicí, agus lena sermon san chun bailúchan cuis a fór des na Havráin a haint mar on bhabhla. Ba bhailim is súil a chahabh ar gá árán eile, siad sin brucht na Carrigabaine agus Aisling Gaol. De chan Diarmadín an dácheann agus can an Éamonn Maicí an dácheann chomá. Ba bhailim díú is tócha ar na difriochtaí anna bheoga atá idir an dá legan acu ó thaobh na phrásaíochta de. Brucht na Carrigabaine firstly is a macaronic song. It comes from Beara in West Cork, and I suppose when English started to become more dominant in Beara, a lot of the songs were translated into English. What happened then was that the English version was incorporated into the Irish version and it was made as one song. Táhaní an tárán seo go mórlam, agus tám chun mulagan de a haint dívanis, agus an san dírómid ar na difriochtaí beaga atá idir an dá legan. Sin, má éicimid ar legan le Diarmadín, feicimid go ritheann sé an dá rása déirneach le chéile agus é canna an chiad versa. Ní mar sinna dhéanaan an Éailís, ach éistimid ar dús le cad dhéanaan an Diarmadín. Sin mar a chan an Diarmadín é, ach an son má éistimid le Éailís ag canna an chiad versa. Brisin si an dá rása déirneach. Mar sin is difriochtaí beaga iad seo, ach is tólam go ganéann siad difriocht ó thaobh an cheoilde a go háirithe agus tú a haint, agus tú ag tógant anála agus ag chuirde chuid phrásaíochta isteach i gceart. Mar sin má lena mar aigeis go dtí Aisling Gaol, is fán anna cháúil é an gceann seo agus de fuair Mhaonaigh an fán seo i Mairead Freeman agus de chóirigh sé éiad an fiano. Agus ó hin tá anna chuid ceoltóirí tar éis le a gcuid legannacha féine dhéanamh de cosúla Mary Bergan ar an bhadóg Stein agus an son Bert eile siad son Liam O'Flynn agus Mícheál Ó Shúilleabháin atá imethe ar lína fíringe. Mar sin tám chun Aisling Gaol a haintdíobh agus an son lerómid beagáin margheall ar an bhrásaíocht agus an duine difriochtaí idir an dá legan. Mar sin aisling gaol. Agus is tócha go in na difriochtaí beaga seo difriocht an a bhór domsa agus mé ag déanamh Mhaonaigh na faoin. Mar sin má éachtamíistenis legan le Diarmadín, cíhamíd go mrisin sé frása 6 agus 7 agus é a canna, ach ní mar sin é an EIlís sé. Seo mar dhéanann Diarmadín. Ach, bíonn sé beánaín de friúla EIlís. Tuis go rihann si an dárása sin le chéile. Mar sin agus mé inis ag Mhaonaigh fan faoin bhela cosúla seo, bín cinnte iard na Maclainn is tócha a dhearú an anáú agus an bhrásíocht agus is tócha nuair a bhíam ag seint bíon EIlís nó Diarmadín nó Mhaonaigh nó Danny ag canna lom I méintin agus mé ag seint agus is tócha go inan sé sin difriocht mór, difriocht anna bhór domsa agus go gcuireann sé le a chuid ceol tuis go mbíonn siad lom an tamar fad. Mar sin ní chiad na haráin bhela is tócha a chanan muintre Shúilleabháin Maicí a bháin, tá go leor a bhráin granúra, bríomhara acu a churn go mór le ihe choulúidir nó tacht le chéile. Táim chun rácheann a haint díbanis agus siad sin the hide and go seek ceann a chanan EIlís. This again is another macaronic song and it's full of development and fun. And then the second one is An Ghlacáin, and this is sung, I suppose, by the young people in Cooley and in Moose Cree, and it's about a pata Ghlacáin, a pet dog that gets into a bit of an accident or a bit of trouble, gets hurt. So these are both very humorous songs, and they add greatly to a night's fun or to a music session. And these versions are sung by EIlís Maicí. So tas no ag méinis leis an hide and go seek. Sin an hide and go seek, agus anis an Ghlacáin. Agus mar sin bíon na faoin seo ag gháil timpeall idir chléigean agus is tócha go mbíonn siad á hainte gomsa mar fort ach go mbíonn siad á chana an son le chur fá ag muintir Shúilleabháin Maicí agus go gcuireann siad go mór le híthe céiliúra nó le beocht agus le hanam agus le sprid na híthe. Mar sin, tám chun críoch nuanis le fán atá as an gotíntacht is stolam. An ceann seo an tedal atá ná cos áhaing na séad agus si EIlís Maicí a bhíon ag canna an áráin seo. Taithníonn sé go mór lom agus dalríonn sé go muineann sé le counter bhúscrí nó le cúnta carcaí péiscéala, ní le is agoin cé a chuúmé nó caihin, ach do fuair EIlís an legan seo ó Ghlacáin fádraigh ó buchaile, agus do fuair seisiné ó na bháthair nóra ní bhuirithe hartar an líon 1926. Tá fán anna nabh gnách ag buint leis, níl sé cloiste go an éonáis eile, agus saolítear go minic é le clán í Shúilleabháin Maicí. Ba bhalam má bhuachas ó crí a gháilt le muinteoirí Shúilleabháin Maicí, le Danny, le EIlís agus le Mhaonaigh, a bhíon fial flathúil i gcónaí lena chuid ama agus lena gcuid amhránaíochta, agus a chairigh go mórlam an tiúnscnaimh seo a chur gríoch. Tám ag súil go mór in ag na díon glasála go mé míid an búla le chéile a ríist agus cilúra a bheith going. Chomáile sin, as well as that, I would really like to thank Tristan and Oisín in Trad Éireann for giving me the opportunity to present Clowny Shúilleabháin Maicí to you, and tá súlagam gur muin si bhar fad tanavas gur míle maithbh.
Hi, this is Éamonn Galldubh, Dublin uilleann piper and flautist. I'm going to talk to you about Ned Stapleton, who is my grandfather. Ned, although he passed away before I was born, he had a huge influence on my music, and indeed he left a legacy for the traditional music scene in Ireland as a whole. Ned was born in 1916 in Arklow in County Wicklow. His family moved over to London when he was quite young, and it is in London that he learnt his music. However, a lot of his impact stems from when he arrived back to Ireland in the mid-1940s. He then met my grandmother, Mairéad Murray, became Mairéad Stapleton, and in 1952 they had a daughter, Derval, my mother. The family home in Leinster Street in Phibsborough in Dublin became a mecca for the traditional music scene of the 1950s and 1960s, with a who's who of the music scene arriving there, particularly every Sunday when they would have a session every Sunday evening. And regulars there would have included Sonny Brogan, George Rowley, John Egan, John Kelly Sr. and many others. We'll talk about these sessions a little bit later. One connection that Ned had was with the collector Bryan Brannock, and Ned served as the source for 14 of the tunes in Brannock's Ceol Rinkin a Héireann a Hain. I'm going to play one of these tunes for you now, which is called The Limestone Rock. Ned was mostly known as a flautist, having won the Oireachtas competition on the flute, as well as a composer of tunes. However, he also played the whistle, fiddle, and had a set of uilleann pipes crafted for him by Mac Kiernan of Cabra. The sessions in Ned's house in Leinster Street attracted a wide range of musicians from the 50s and 60s Dublin trad scene, with accordionist Sonny Brogan, fiddle player George Rowley, as well as John Brennan, Bill Hart, Brandon Brannock, John Kelly Sr., Tom Mulligan Sr., Mick O'Connor, and passing musicians such as Willie Clancy, as well as occasional guests like the Dubliners. Every Sunday night, a session will be held in the house with up to 10 to 12 people playing music. Ned was also the possessor of one of the first reel-to-reel tape recorders in the country, which he built himself partially from elevator components, as his day job was in Otis. And he subsequently recorded many of these sessions. These reel-to-reel tapes now reside at the Irish Traditional Music Archives, and I'm going to play a short extract from one of these recordings. family home, I came across my grandfather's collection of reel-to-reel tapes. I was fascinated by these recordings of sessions from the 50s and 60s. Also in the house was my grandfather's extensive library of books on traditional Irish music, including tomes by authors such as Captain Francis O'Neill and the Reverend Richard Hennery. Among these was Captain Francis O'Neill's Irish Minstrels and Musicians, an original version. I found this book particularly compelling as a child. Captain Francis O'Neill's flamboyant writing style, given biographical details of figures in the history of Irish music, particularly pipers and fiddle players from the 1700s onwards. As I now find myself studying traditional Irish music and pipers of the 1700s, it seems that things have come full circle in this regard. My grandfather had also travelled quite a bit. On his way back from a stint in Nigeria while working with Otis, he came home via Birmingham, where he stayed with his brother-in-law and his sister. There was a young singer staying in the house with them by the name of Luke Kelly, and Luke befriended Ned. Luke was at this stage researching some ballads. One of these was The Rocky Road to Dublin. They had the words of it from a book, but he wasn't sure of the melody, so my grandfather is credited with having taught Luke Kelly this melody. It's for compositions perhaps that my grandfather is most known, and in this regard I'm going to play probably the best known of his compositions. It's a tune called Sonny's Return. The Sonny in question here is the aforementioned Sonny Brogan. As previously mentioned, Ned had built one of the first reel-to-reel tape machines in the country. As well as recording live music, Ned also used it to record and distribute copies of rare recordings by Patsy Toohey, John McFadden and others, which at this point were not easily available in Ireland, thus building up a resource for other musicians to learn from these recordings. I have no doubt that Ned's enthusiasm for recording and documenting music and tunes have been an influence in my own inclinations to attempt the same. I'm now going to play another tune that was collected from Ned by Brandon Brannock and appeared in Clodrink and a Heron a Hain, The Sunny Banks. As well as his interest in documenting and recording music, Ned had an interest in teaching, and he was influential in the setting up of the Church Street Club with Sligo flautist John Egan, and he taught there on a Friday evening. His pupils included Neely Mulligan and Owen Dignan. And this is an aspect of Ned's musicianship that I see a little bit of a mirror with myself as well, and my own interest in teaching music. And as well as teaching music, Ned liked to write about music. He wrote several articles in the journal Gaol, which was edited by his friend Bryan Brannock. Ned's articles are opinionated and informative. He saw music for the way it was in the 1950s, prior to widespread acceptance within the status quo of Irish society. He rallied against what he saw as commercial interests taking over the music, and he was struck as well, I suppose, having been spent a lot of time in London himself, by how people from outside Ireland seem to have more interest in genuine traditional Irish music than the general population within Ireland. And he sought to remedy that and to change opinions. I'm now going to play another reel that was composed by my grandfather. This time it was transcribed from a recording by John Kelly Sr. by John Kelly's granddaughter Aoife Kelly. And it is that transcription that I have referenced in learning this tune. Ned also had a deep connection with a town on Spidgale in County Galway, where he befriended the tin whistle player Festy Conlon. Ned and the family spent a few weeks or months each year in on Spidgale during the summer. Sessions were again had here with visiting musicians such as Seamus Ennis and the rest of the local musicians of the area. Festy became a lasting friend of Ned's, and indeed spent a prolonged period of time subsequently in Dublin, living in the family home in Leinster Street while Festy worked in Dublin. I'm now going to play another tune that was collected from Ned by Bryan Brannock, called Drag Her Round the Road. As well as his deep love of traditional Irish dance music, Ned also had a great respect and knowledge of Irish song, as is evidenced in the presence in his library of books such as Liam Denari's Ceol on Moon. It is from one of these books from his library that I learned the next air, which is the beautiful Munster air Spalpeen Arun. In conclusion, while I never got to meet Ned in person as he had passed away before I was born, I find that many of my musical interests at this time, such as collecting and recording tunes, teaching music, composing tunes, multi-instrumentalism, and research and writing about Irish music, can be linked back to him. Ned left a great legacy for traditional Irish music, particularly in Dublin, and has continued to be an inspiration for me throughout my life.
agus mi sé gur ní Ghlacáin agus tá me chun blúr bhío cainte agus ceol haint inmh Ghlínear Mhaonaigh ar Tom Ghlacáin. It's kind of a funny one, you know, we were talking about people who inspired you an awful lot, and for me there's so many musicians that I have just obsessed over for years and like copied and got really engrossed in their styles and tried to, you know, rob a lot of their techniques. But one person who I think has shaped my relationship with music an awful lot is my grandfather, Tom Ghlacáin, who I actually have never met. But I think my relationship with music has been forged an awful lot from the, I suppose, tagfall connection that I had with it from home. And my father taught me the fiddle growing up, and he taught my brother and my sister as well, and his father taught him. And it was always, I suppose, a very central thing to family life in our house growing up. And I never met my grandfather Tom, so it's a bit of a mad one, but I feel like he had a massive impact, obviously, on my own father and my uncles and my grandmother as well. And so I've kind of gotten to know him through the ripples of that impact, maybe. And I think, you know, growing up, we would always have heard so many stories about Tom, and obviously he was spoken an awful lot about in our extended family and his relationship with the fiddle. And it's something that keeps coming up again and again, was that he was someone who got great solace out of sitting in the kitchen and opening up O'Neill's 1001 and just playing away for nobody else but just himself, the pure pleasure of it. And I think with, you know, the whole COVID-19 in the year we've had this year, I especially have started to really appreciate the mindfulness and the space that music gives us to just sit down and, you know, do nothing else but just learn a new tune or go over an old tune 100 times for an hour. So yeah, hopefully over the next 20 minutes or so we'll be able to reflect an awful lot on Tom's life and get to know him a little bit better. Tom Ghlacáin came to Dublin in the 1940s. He came from the Rosses and Donegal the first day, from a small townland outside of Mairéad called Falmore. And it was there in Donegal that he learned to fiddle off a man named Hugh Bonner, who went on to be killed in the Battle of Garma in 1937 during the Spanish Civil War. and after that a man named Hugh Devaney. He was a founding member of the Mhaonaigh marching band, and he came to Dublin to join the Gardaí, and it was there he met my grandmother, a native of Marino, Maureen Healy. Tom and Maureen had 3 sons and a daughter, Deirdre, who tragically died of cystic fibrosis when she was just 2 years of age. Tom was a sergeant in the Clontarf Garda station, which was very handy for him because it was at the top of his road that he lived on, and I am constantly hearing stories of how he'd be coming home for a fry and a few tunes whenever he got the chance. I think it's fair to say that Tom's life was all about playing music, especially in Dublin. He was a big fan of sport too, of course, and he was often to be seen in the old Pipers Club on Thomas Street, the Tradition Club in Slattery's, and the Four Seasons, not to mention the Cultural Inn in Monkstown. I think it's also fair to say that he's the reason why we're all playing music today. Tom was a real Donegal man, and it's something he kind of, I suppose, with the John Doherty thing and the music, was that a big thing at home?
Well, it was. Well, Donegal to me was a big thing. Like when I grew up, I mean, just certainly even the name Donegal was kind of magical.
Yeah.
Because we used to hear them talking a lot about it, and one of the earliest things I remember about Donegal would be Tom could remember the teacher reading the roll in school, and all the names of the people who were in his class, and it went by their patronymics.
Okay.
Well, it means that, like, say Megan Joe Jack.
Oh, right, very good. Yeah.
You know, it went by that. So that's the way that the teacher would. So I remember I could nearly do it myself.
Are you serious?
You know, and I remember as well. You know, he was speaking Irish to me here in Dublin. So I was being brought up in a place where there was no Irish around me at all.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was very, very sympathetic to Irish. Didn't have an awful lot of it. Would speak a few words of it here and there, but
yeah.
But he kind of encouraged it. But the whole thing of the music was in him. And long before I started playing, when my sister was alive, Tom used to play the accordion.
Really?
Yes.
God, we're unearthing some family secrets here now.
Yeah,
Because
he
I never
played
knew
the
that.
old button accordion.
Okay.
And he got a button accordion off Martin Walton.
Yeah.
And he brought the accordion home. And when my sister was alive, before she went to hospital, he used to play the accordion for her.
Wow.
And when she died, he stopped. He never played the accordion again.
Wow.
But there was a fiddle under the stairs, an old fiddle that he brought from Falmore.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was so far gone he couldn't get it done up.
Yeah.
But it was under the stairs. But anyway, so he got a fiddle, and I was left with no choice. On my 6th birthday, I was marched over to the College of Music to learn classical music. And in the meantime, he'd got to know John Kelly in Cable Street, and through John Kelly, then he got to know the Church Street Club.
Yeah.
And it all sort of grew from there. And then as I started playing, and as I developed, bit by bit, he was encouraging me to, he would bring me along to Church Street in the summer holidays.
Wow.
So we would be in the back of Church Street, and we would be playing. But like I can still see, and I can still name all the players who were there. How are we doing? What did we play? But one of his favourite tunes was, he kind of liked this. He liked the Swallow's Tale, and he liked also the Skylark.
Lovely. Lovely.
So we just tried the Skylark for the crack.
Okay.
I suppose you're talking about my father. Yeah, I mean, you know, during the 50s, I think it was kind of when he kind of reconnected with music. As he said, he came to Dublin for the first 10 years. He didn't even know that traditional music really existed in Dublin until John Kelly. He met John Kelly one day walking the beat, and John told him about the session that happened in Church Street, and from there he went down to that, and that opened up a whole new life for him. And like his whole life, certainly whatever, but you know, the family at home, but that to him was the most important thing. And then he got involved in cultus, and like through cultus, he you know, he would have pushed. He was on a committee to push the gaol, and like back in the very early 70s, you might have about maybe 8 or 9 records a year that would come out in traditional music. Not like now where everybody has a CD. In them days, you'd know that somebody was making a record for 4 months in advance, and you'd be waiting with bated breath to hear this album come out. And there was always a great sense of excitement when somebody would bring out the new album. And he really pushed the gaol that time to record John Doherty, because John was alive and well, and he was in his early 70s at that particular stage. So they pushed the gaol, went out and they put the money out, in fairness, and my father, with Seamus Mhaonaigh and Paddy McIlvenny and my other brother Seamus, went up and they recorded an album of John. And I think, if I'm not corrected, that was the first commercial record of John Doherty's playing, and it was a huge thing. And I think he was particularly proud of the fact that number one, that I suppose John was a Donegal man, number two, that he was probably a travelling man, number three, there was this whole style of fiddle playing, which up until the 70s was completely forgotten about. And it was kind of, from what I can gather, it was kind of considered to be second rate. Now thankfully that's changed with the chorus and fiddlery, and other people have taken on the mantle and other people have gone, but I'll always kind of credit my father with maybe kind of really pushing that album that came out. I think it was about 1974 that record would have come out, and it was definitely the first commercial album that John Doherty released us. Then subsequently did a double album, and then afterwards Clara did another album, but that one, the orange covered record, black and white with John and a mountain behind him pictured on the cover, that was the first commercial record that John released in the 70s.
Yeah.
Like my father had a great, I mean, obviously kind of the Donegal connection was a huge thing to him too, but I mean, if you were to ask me, his most pleasurable moments, I think, were sitting in the old kitchen at home, and we used to have an old a mono record player, and it was like a briefcase, and when you'd open the briefcase you'd put the speaker over one there, and the turntable was separate, so you got the speaker separate. And he used to, even when he'd come in from night time and he'd be having me out working, what have you, he'd always put on the Joe Cooley violin record, and he'd sit down and he used to get 2 close pegs on his fiddle, and he'd put Joe Cooley on 33 and a third revolutions per minute, and he'd be spinning away, and my father would be listening to Joe. So he'd come in and he'd play the whole record through with Joe Cooley, and I think just the whole spirit of that record, there was an accordion, it wasn't a fiddle, it was it really, it touched them at whatever level it was, it really did. And to be quite honest with you, even to this day, I suppose it's probably one of my favourite records ever made in traditional music, is that Joe Cooley record, and certainly to him it was.
Very good. Do you want to chance one of the tunes? We were talking about a few tunes that he would have taught you, and that as well subsequently you would have taught me. So.
Yeah. It's one particular tune I remember. I remember coming in one evening and he was playing this tune. It was a tune called Farewell to Connacht. It's a tune I'd always associate with him. But we played something after it, yeah?
Yeah.